All right, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. My name's Shawn. Today we're going to be going over what's new in Nebula. So I'm assuming if you're here, you know what Nebula is. Just in case you don't, real quick, it's our cloud-managed networking solution. Basically allows you to manage your switches, APs, NSG security gateways in the cloud. No need to go on site, no need to set up VPN tunnels, port forwarding, anything like that. As we go through today, guys, if you have any questions, send them in using the Q&A box. So that's how I will see your questions and comments. I don't have room to have all the different bits of the Zoom interface up here. So again, use the Q&A if you have any questions and feel free to ask them as we go through. So today I'm going through updates. So at the end of June, the last week of June, we rolled out some firmware updates. We're calling it 9.2 of Nebula. Some of these features automatically show up in the cloud. Some of them do require you update your firmware. So I'm using a slide deck that was put together by our engineering team to help train our pre-sales staff. So apologies in advance for some of the grammar and other little things there, a little bit more than what you'd normally get with one of my presentations. Not that mine are perfect by any sense of the word. So we'll start by talking about some of the enhancements in the GUI. So you can see here on the summary report, they've simplified things here as far as being able to choose the custom date range to make it easier for you to type those in, fit them all on the screen. We've added an enhancement here when you're using the AP or gateway to view clients. You've now got a drop down that allows you to switch between showing all clients and showing just those clients that you have policies in place to affect. So for instance, if you're using an access point and you've got MAC filtering turned on to blacklist some people, you can use that just to show those that have been affected by that policy. They do not have to be online at the time you run this. Makes it easier to go through some of those things and find out who's being affected or who has been affected in the past, so you can update going forward. Some big changes to the way the license calculator works. So for Nebula ProPack and Nebula Security Services, these are additional services that you buy a license for in order to enable and use. We do co-termination, so all of your Nebula ProPack licenses expire at the same time. Your security solutions expire at a different time. So instead of having two different calculators, we've simplified it and just added a single calculator button. Now in the GUI, you go there, click on it, and it'll take you to this screen here. You choose the date you'd like things to expire on, and it'll automatically tell you how many points you need to be able to extend out to that, and then gives you a breakdown of specifically which point combinations to buy to give you the least number of licenses that you need to apply. We've also now added a link to the Zyxel web store, so you can buy the licenses online. Now, I want to say this here, buying licenses online is not cheap. So as one of our partners, you're much better off buying through distribution as you normally would in the past, buying through Digital River, not our web store. Our web store is there for convenience, not for affordability. Many of the things you'll find in the web store, the pricing is higher than MSRP. So there should be no real concerns about competition from that as far as a price standpoint goes. So some other enhancements in the GUI. The last update, 9.1, I believe it was, we added the ability to SSH into certain devices to help with troubleshooting. That had been locked just to owner accounts, so only whoever initially set up and owns the organization had the ability to remote in. So we've now freed it up on the access points to allow non-owner accounts to also establish remote connections in. And we've added support. The big one here is the GS1350 series switches. Those have now been added and now can be managed in Nebula. And then we've got the new GS2220 series. Those also will be able to be managed in Nebula here shortly. So on to enhancements to our access points, which is where most of the enhancements are for this latest firmware update. One of the big ones here is DPPSK, Dynamic Personal Pre-Shared Key. Now, the way Wi-Fi was envisioned by the engineers was if you have a business, you would use something called 802.1x to authenticate your clients and get them onto the network. But what we found is in the real world, not a lot of people do that. It's kind of complex to set up. You've got to have an authentication server. Now with Nebula, Nebula can be your authentication server. You've got to configure the clients to use 802.1x. You've got to set up the right security protocols. It's a little bit messy, not too bad. And also, if you have a user who has sort of an unstable connection, 802.1x just compounds that because they're constantly having to re-log in and re-authenticate. So in the real world, a lot of businesses are just using pre-shared key, right? The home security where everyone shares the same password. So dynamic pre-shared key is kind of like the best of both worlds. You don't need to set up separate SSIDs for different people in your organization. You have one SSID, everybody connects to it, and each user gets their own pre-shared key or password. And when you authenticate with that pre-shared key, you can automatically apply and assign them to different VLANs and things like that. So you don't need a separate guest network and your employee network. You can just have one SSID, or you don't need a different SSID set up for, the accounting team versus the warehouse team, things like that. So it helps simplify things, solves a lot of those issues that people have had in the past with it. So this is the interface here. You go into configure and cloud authentication, and this is where you can add your accounts. You can do a bulk setup here. So you can see here, you can choose how many accounts you want to generate, which VLAN ID you want to assign them to. And then all the information can be emailed to your administrator or head of IT or whoever is going to be in charge of that, and control which sites they have access to, et cetera. So it's in there, and you can also set it up for temporary, how many days those are for. So you can set up, a number of accounts for your internal staff and have that never expire. And then you can generate additional guest network SSI or passwords to use and have those expire after a certain period of time. We also now have an API that can work with this DPPSK. So for instance, here, this is a customer we have in Europe, Wiflex, and they basically do hotel and public internet access. And they're doing this with the DPPSK. So basically, if you're a user and you want to get onto their network, you go in, it uses the API to generate a new account, and then it prints out the account with the password for that guest to use. So kind of a cool idea there. Whoops, forgot we had animation. So which leads to the next slide here, which is API. So if you're using Nebula ProPack, you do have the ability, I should have mentioned that earlier, if you see this little diamond signed up here on any of these features, that means you need ProPack in order to be able to use it. So we do have two APIs right now. We have one API that is set up that'll get you a list of organizations, give you a list of sites with their IDs, let you know whether they're online or offline, give you some alerts, some device information. And then a second one here, which provides SSID information and DPPSK management. So if you'd like to use one of these APIs, they are available now. We're still sort of in I'm going to call it sort of a beta test mode. So before getting access to this, you do need to reach out to your salesperson, Jacob, Ivan, Tri, myself, and we need to get a little information from you, what you're looking to do, what information you need to get, and then we'll go from there to see if we can open it up for you or not. We're specifically, looking for information like what information is the API not currently providing that you need, things like that, to see if we can open that up and add that for you. So another feature people have been asking for a long time is NAT Mode. So this is the ability of the access point by itself to generate and provide IP addresses on its own subnet for the wireless users. The best way of doing guest networks is to have them on their own separate VLAN. However, we know in a lot of cases you're upgrading their wireless, but they don't give you access to their switches, or they don't have switches that support VLANs. And they don't want to upgrade to them. So the way we have traditionally dealt with this was something called layer 2 isolation. You go in, you enable layer 2 isolation, and it prevents the wireless clients from sending data to any device that is not explicitly whitelisted by MAC address. And so that's enforced by the access point. It works pretty good. It makes it really easy to give people guest access. The problem is it doesn't stop traffic coming from the local network into the guest network. So we've had some concern from people because multicast packets are being sent from the LAN, out across the LAN, and that includes the guest network. So people using sniffers and things like that would be able to see some of that multicast traffic. Now, they wouldn't be able to send any packets to any of the local devices, but still people were concerned that they could see some of this multicast traffic. So this is the solution to that. This is similar to how I believe Ruckus does it. I know this is similar to how Meraki does their guest networks. So now you can do NAT on a per SSID basis. in Nebula, and this only affects certain models. I believe right now it is limited just to our Wi-Fi 6 models. And I'll have a slide coming up here that's showing you all these new features, which ones apply to which models. But this NAT mode, this is free. It does not require the Pro Pack to be able to use NAT mode. However, we also have the ability to do a traffic log where we record and store the traffic in the cloud. That does require a Pro Pack. Probably not a big deal here in the US. In Europe, anytime you're providing guest Wi-Fi access, by law, you have to log everything your users do because you are essentially a ISP, and that's required for ISPs. So in the US, probably no need for this feature, but if you're operating in Europe, it does require a Pro Pack in order for us to store those logs for you. Another new feature on the access points is we've finally added bridge mode. So the ability to be able to join two physical locations together over a wireless bridge instead of having to run Ethernet to them. So this is very common in cases where you've got a customer who's got a couple different buildings. They don't have any ability to run Ethernet or fiber between those buildings without digging up the parking lot. So this allows you now to create wireless bridge. It's part of our smart mesh functionality. So you can have regular smart mesh, and then you can turn on bridging if you do want bridging. So in the past with mesh, the bridge was just to each additional access point. Now, if you turn on bridging, it hops around just like before to different access points, but now you can also pass traffic out of those access points through the Ethernet port. And again, this only works on certain models, specifically those that have, I believe, 2 Ethernet ports on them. So if the AP only has 1 Ethernet port, it doesn't work. And again, I've got a slide showing you the specific models. But this is something people have been asking for a while. So it does require a Pro Pack in order to be able to use bridge. The regular Smart Mesh, though, is still available to all users, free or pro. And we also have the ability as part of this to do failover mode, to specifically be able to enable whether you want access points, if they lose access to the wired network, to automatically put themselves into repeater mode. So some other enhancements here. At this point, all of our access points support the standard Smart Mesh. The wireless health report now works across all models. And for those of you using the new Wi-Fi 6 APs, if you've got the 4x4 APs, so currently that's the WAX 650S. Next month, it'll be the WAX 610D and NWA 210A. Hopefully those will launch next month in August. You've now got the ability to use 160 megahertz channels on the 5 gigahertz radio in Wi-Fi 6 mode there. One note though, when you put it in 160 megahertz mode, it switches down to a 2x2 functionality instead of 4x4. And this is a limitation of the current Qualcomm Wi-Fi 6 chipset. So here's that fun chart I was talking about here. So you can see here, you want to do NAT, DHCP firewall. It works on most of our models here. Wireless bridging, again, works on just about everything with 2 Ethernet ports. So NAT mode, NWA 1123 AC HD, the 1302 AC, the 5123 AC HD, the WAX 6303 D-S. So everything that is basically Wave 2 11 AC supports this NAT mode. And all of the Wi-Fi 6 products support the NAT mode. DPPSK, like I said before, is only on the Wi-Fi 6 models. And then bridging is on good chunk of the models, but pretty much everything that's got 2 Ethernet ports with a couple exceptions in there. So we can always send this over to you. You can reach out to Jacob and stuff and get a hard copy of this if you need it for reference points, or they can just point you in the right direction. So now on to switches. So the big thing in switches is support for the GS1350 series. We rolled these out last year without cloud management. So cloud management is now available. I do want to note here that some of the interesting, unique features of these switches that are not entirely 100% fully supported in cloud mode versus non-cloud mode, although the core ones are there. And many of these features do require that you have Pro Pack enabled on the organization where you're using them at. So if you want these extra features and you don't want to pay for Pro Pack, you have to use them in the standard traditional management mode instead of Nebula. So one of the cool features that this offers here is the ability to do data and PoE up to 250 meters. So traditionally, Ethernet and PoE only go out to 100 meters or around 300 feet. So we've more than doubled it here. The trade-off being that you drop the speed to 10 megabits per second. However, that's still plenty of speed for most applications out there, such as IP cameras where you need these longer runs. We've taken the PoE settings, whether you want to use consumption mode or not, and we have moved that into the port settings instead of one interface where you've got the ports listed separately. It's now just the standard part of the port setup, so you can now find that there. We've got this feature here called Auto PD Discovery. So basically it allows you to determine what device is connected to it, and it gives us the ability here to recover this device should it go offline. So we've got the ability to use either LLDP or ping to keep track of that device, and if it stops responding, we can power cycle it to help reboot it. So this gives you some settings here, so you can say here how often you want to pull the device to see if it's offline, how many times you want it to fail that polling before it decides to reboot it, right? Because if you just got a drop packet somewhere because of bad cabling or something, you don't want it to be constantly rebooting your device. And then you tell it how long it takes for the device to power up. So it knows once it's power cycled the device, how long does it need to wait before it resumes checking to see if the device is online or not. These switches offer a surveillance page is what we're calling it here, where basically it shows you, what's plugged into it, what the speed is, PoE draw, bandwidth being used, the system name, if it can detect it, the IP address that's connected on there. And we've got the ability now to learn IP addresses of connected devices without requiring the gateway. So previously with Nebula, you had to have an NSG gateway to know the IP addresses of connected devices. Now we can use LLDP to figure that out for us. And we've enhanced our voice VLAN. So we've had this voice VLAN functionality. You turn it on, tell it what VLAN port to use, what priority to give it, and it allowed you to set up an OUI mask, or basically a MAC address filter, to be able to automatically assign this VLAN to connected devices, right? So if you knew the manufacturer of your IP phones on the network, you could simply put in the first 6 digits of the MAC address, and it would automatically find them all and apply the VLAN to them. We can still do that, but we've also added LLDP-MED, so link layer detection protocol, and it's media endpoint detection to also be able to find it. So if you don't want to use OUI, you can use LLDP to be able to figure out which devices connected are voice devices and automatically assign them to the voice VLAN. And the 1350 switches also offer continuous PoE. So even when applying changes or rebooting the switch, PoE continues to flow to the connected devices so they don't reboot. So here's the list of the features that are now supported. You will see here the surveillance screen, continuous PoE, the extended range are only on the 1350 switches. Auto PD recovery is on the 1350 series switches and will also be added to the GS 2220s in August. And then the other standard features you're used to, ACL rules, IGMP, IPTV mode, STP guard, port authentication are still on the NSW series, the GS 1920s, the 2220s, and the 1930s. So now going over to the gateway side of things, the big new feature here is the ability to automatically email a batch script to your VPN remote users to get them to connect to your VPN setup. So this is good for people working at home or working using their mobile devices to try to VPN back into the office. Instead of having to manually configure each device for the initial VPN setup, we can generate a batch file and email it to your user for them to run. This works with Windows, this works with Mac, and this works with iOS. It does not work with Android because there is no standard way in Android to do it. We're still trying to figure out how to do it to at least support most devices, but every manufacturer, and oftentimes even between models of manufacturers, Android has it implemented differently. So this is there for you. It's pretty straightforward. You go in, set up your remote access VPN, same as you always have, and we've added a new field here where you can put in email addresses to have us email that script to them. Because these are batch files, we changed the extension name so it gets through most web filtering, but the end user on Windows will need to change the extension name back to BAT in order to be able to run it. iOS doesn't have that problem. We send over a file that is normally allowed through email, so those just work there. And that, guys, concludes today's webinar. So if you have any questions, send them into Q&A. If you have any feedback for me or any additional questions you'd like to ask offline, my email is up there on the screen. It is shawnr@zyxel.com, SHAWNR@zyxel.com. And while I've got you here, be sure to check out our forum, forum.zyxel.com. It's a user forum, so you can get help from your fellow users. It's also monitored by our R&D and tech support team, so you will get people from our office, people from our headquarters in Taiwan. You will get them answering and responding to questions and help there. So if you don't need immediate help on something, forum's a great place to go. Also a great place to share ideas for feedback, things you'd like to see us change and update. The Nebula team is very, very open to feedback. We're constantly trying to improve Nebula and keep it, make things easier for you and make it more valuable for you to use. I am not seeing any questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Thanks for joining us, guys. Again, if you have something you are working on or have some questions, just feel free to email me directly. If I don't get back to you in 24 hours, send it again. We've got like 3 different anti-spam filters here, and sometimes things get caught by a couple of them and it never makes it through to me. Samuel did ask a question here. Here, we got some other questions. I do have some questions. Let's answer them real quick. Can we get a copy of the presentation? This will be posted to our YouTube account. Zyxel Channel Americas, I think is what it's called. So it'll be posted up in the next, by Monday, probably tomorrow, but Monday at the latest. So you can always check it there. If you want some of the slides, reach out to your salesperson. They can send you a PDF copy of the slides. Is there a plan to enable DPPSK on the 802.11 AC models? And the answer to that is it's under evaluation. So maybe, I wouldn't count on it. At least for the time being, you know, if you need this feature, go with the Wi-Fi 6 APs. They're pretty inexpensive. I mean, obviously the WAX 650S is really expensive, but like the NWA 110AX, and the NWA 510D, those are both very affordable and aren't that much of a premium over most of our 11AC products. It may come in the future. We don't know. We need to figure out how to implement it on those older chipsets, whether there's enough horsepower to implement it, and whether it makes sense to implement it at this point, as those products are, you know, going to slowly get replaced by Wi-Fi 6. So that's it, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. If you are typing something up, highlight it, copy it, and send it to me in an email. Again, it's Shawn R, SHAWNR @Zyxel.com. Thanks, guys.